Ladies and gentlemen, sometimes in life you're going to feel like nobody sees you, like you're just fading into the background while the rest of the world moves on without you. But I'm here to tell you, God sees you, and he's fighting battles for you that you don't even know are happening. There are moments when help shows up out of nowhere. A neighbor offers a ride. A stranger pays for your meal. That's no coincidence. That's no accident. That's God putting people in place to remind you you are never alone. When the storms come and the noise is loud and you think you're about to lose it all, you feel this peace wash over you. That's not weakness. That's not denial. That's the Spirit of God wrapping you up, holding you steady, keeping you from falling apart. There are situations you should have never walked away from. Accidents you should have been in, nights you should have given up, but you're still here. That's protection. That's divine intervention. That's proof that God is fighting for you even when nobody else will. And when you think you can't take another step, when you're tired of proving your worth, tired of being invisible, somehow you find the strength to keep going, to stand back up, to keep believing in something bigger than the pain. So don't you dare think you're forgotten. Don't you dare think your life doesn't matter, because the truth is God is in your corner. He is fighting battles you can't see and winning wars you don't even know about. And if you can trust that, if you can hold on to that, there is nothing that can break you, nothing. Unseen support is often the most powerful kind because it is invisible to everyone else, but undeniable to the person receiving it. Imagine an elderly woman who lives alone, her children grown and moved far away, her neighbors busy with their own lives. To most of the world, she seems forgotten, tucked away in a quiet corner no one visits. Yet there are moments when something happens that she cannot explain. Moments when she knows deep down that she is not as alone as she appears. She wakes up in the morning and feels a quiet strength, a steady calm that allows her to rise and face another day despite her aching bones and weary spirit. That strength does not come from her own willpower alone. It comes from an unseen hand that steadies her heart and renews her courage when she feels like giving up. On days when her body feels too heavy to carry, when the weight of loneliness settles over her like a thick blanket, she still finds herself making her way to the kitchen to prepare a simple breakfast. She notices that the groceries she thought would run out somehow last a bit longer than she expected. Maybe it's a neighbor who left a bag of fruit on her porch without a note. Maybe it's her memory playing tricks on her and she forgot she had an extra can of soup tucked away. Or maybe, just maybe, it is God making sure she has enough. The world would call it chance. She knows better. She knows that unseen support does not always look like a miracle that splits the sky wide open. Sometimes it is simply having what she needs right when she needs it. There are evenings when her mind begins to wander, when she thinks about the people she has lost and the dreams that never came true. Her eyes fill with tears as she wonders whether her life mattered to anyone at all. And then, as if on cue, the phone rings. A friend she has not spoken to in years calls to check in. A volunteer from her church asks if she needs anything. The timing feels too perfect to be accidental. The comfort in that voice on the other end of the line is like a warm blanket wrapped around her sadness. She realizes that unseen support sometimes comes in the form of a voice that calls out her name when she feels like she's disappearing. Even her health has moments of quiet resilience that defy understanding. She remembers times when she was too sick to get out of bed, when it felt like her body would simply stop working. She prepared herself for the worst, bracing for decline that seemed inevitable. But somehow she recovered. The doctor could not fully explain it, and neither could she. All she knew was that she woke up one morning with just enough energy to move again, just enough appetite to take a few bites of food, just enough spirit to keep living. To anyone else, it might look like a small thing. To her, it is everything. It is proof that unseen support is woven into the fabric of her life, showing up in moments that could so easily have ended differently. She notices how often people dismiss the idea that God is actively working in quiet, unnoticed ways. They expect thunder, lightning, burning bushes. But she has learned that the miracles meant for her don't need an audience. They happen in the silence, in the spaces where no one is watching. When she nearly falls in the hallway, but somehow catches herself on the door frame, she knows she did not do it alone. When she feels an unexpected peace wash over her after a restless night, She knows there is a presence sitting beside her, holding her fears at bay. When she feels compelled to open her Bible and finds a verse that speaks exactly to her situation, she knows she was guided there by something far bigger than herself. There was a day she remembers vividly, a day when she was sure she could not continue. She sat at her kitchen table, her hands trembling over a cup of tea she could barely lift. She had been worrying about bills she could not pay and medicine she might not be able to afford. The fear felt like it would consume her. She closed her eyes and whispered a simple prayer, not expecting any answer. Only minutes later, she heard the mail slot rattle and an envelope slid onto the floor. Inside was a small check from an old friend who had been thinking about it. It wasn't enough to solve every problem, but it was enough to remind her that unseen support is real. That moment changed her. She began to see that she was never truly alone in any struggle. Sometimes support comes in the form of memories that flood her heart when she needs them most. On the loneliest nights, she recalls the voice of her late husband telling her she is stronger than she believes. She remembers the way her mother used to sing hymns in the kitchen and how that music seemed to make the world feel safe. She remembers the faces of friends who prayed for her when she was too tired to pray for herself. These memories are not accidents. They are reminders placed in her mind like tiny beacons, guiding her back to hope when darkness closes in. The world may never understand how she keeps going. They might look at her life and see only the struggle, but she has seen enough evidence to know that the struggle has never been the whole story. There are forces at work she cannot see. There are hands holding her steady, voices whispering courage, blessings arriving unannounced. She does not have to prove it to anyone. She feels it in her bones every morning she wakes up and chooses to keep trying. She senses every time she finds a reason to smile despite the sadness that sometimes lingers in her heart. She recognizes it in the small moments, a flower blooming outside her window, a letter arriving just when she needed encouragement, a neighbor stopping by to say hello without knowing how much she needed human connection. Her life is a tapestry woven with countless threads of unseen support. Some people would say it's luck or coincidence, but she has lived too long and seen too much to call it anything but divine care. She knows that God has been orchestrating these moments all along, meeting her in the hidden spaces no one else could reach. In the hush of her quiet home, in the slow rhythm of her days, she has come to trust that her needs are never overlooked. The world may forget, but God remembers. The world may walk past her, but God stops to sit beside her. That is the kind of unseen support that changes everything. It is not loud or flashy, but it is steady. It is constant. It is the reason she is still here, still hoping, still believing that her life matters. Peace and chaos is something most people never expect to feel. When everything around you is falling apart, when your heart is racing and your mind won't stop spinning, you think peace is the last thing you could possibly find. Yet there she sits, this old woman everyone thinks is frail, alone, and burdened. On the surface, she has every reason to be afraid. Her days are filled with uncertainty. Bills come in faster than money arrives. The medications she needs are expensive. Her health is unpredictable. She lives in a world that often forgets about people like her. And still, when you look into her eyes, there is a steadiness that doesn't match her circumstances. She will tell you she feels something unexplainable. A quiet calm that holds her together when it makes no sense. It happens in the middle of the night when the darkness feels too big. She wakes up gasping from a dream she can't remember, her chest tight with a fear that seems to have no source. She listens to the clock tick, and for a moment she feels small and exposed like a child left alone in the dark. But then something shifts inside her. It is as if a warm blanket has been laid over her spirit. Her breathing begins to slow. The panic starts to loosen its grip. There's no voice speaking aloud to reassure her, no hand she can feel in her own. But there is a presence, something she senses more than she understands. She has come to know it as God meeting her in the middle of the chaos. It is not a peace she created herself. It is not the result of positive thinking or distraction. It is a gift that arrives uninvited, settling over her heart until she can fall back to sleep. In the morning, when she rises from her bed and the old pains in her joints make every movement a challenge, she feels it again. The day ahead holds problems she cannot solve. The mailbox will probably have another notice she can't bear to open. The phone might ring with news she dreads. But as she moves slowly through her routine, she finds that she does not feel as overwhelmed as she expected. There is a softness in her spirit that surprises her. It does not mean the problems are gone. It does not mean she is suddenly stronger or healthier than she was the day before. It means she is being carried. She can almost picture it, a pair of invisible hands lifting some of the weight off her shoulders so she can stand without collapsing. People around her sometimes remark on her calmness. A nurse at her clinic once said, "You're always so peaceful, no matter what's happening." She smiled, knowing that the nurse couldn't see the nights she spends in silent prayer, whispering her fears to the ceiling. The peace the nurse admires does not come naturally. It is not something she could will herself to feel. It arrives as if it has a mind of its own. Sometimes it comes when she is sitting in her chair by the window, watching the clouds drift past. Other times it comes when she feels like she's about to scream from the pressure of everything she cannot control. She doesn't know why it happens, but she has learned to stop questioning it. And the more she accepts it, the more she notices it showing up exactly when she needs it most. There was a week when everything seemed to go wrong. Her heater broke in the middle of winter, leaving her home cold and damp. She caught the flu and spent days unable to keep any food down. A letter arrived from the insurance company denying coverage for a critical medication. Each of these things on their own would have been enough to break her. Together, they felt insurmountable. She remembers sitting on her couch, wrapped in blankets, too sick to get up and too cold to feel comfortable. She closed her eyes and thought, "I can't do this anymore." The words weren't dramatic. They were simply true. She had reached the end of her own strength. But just as she was sinking into despair, she felt something shift inside her chest. It was so subtle, she wondered if she imagined it. Her breathing slowed. The tightness in her throat eased. Her heart stopped pounding. She felt her body relax into the cushions behind her. Nothing in the room had changed. The heater was still broken. Her fever was still high. The letter still sat on the table with its bad news. But inside her, there was a calm that felt stronger than any of the problems she faced. She felt held. She felt seen. It was the most peculiar sensation, being comforted by something she could not see or touch. It didn't solve her problems, but it gave her the courage to endure them. She later told her pastor that she thought it must be what Scripture meant by the peace that passes understanding, because she certainly could not explain it. She has had moments when she thought she should be more afraid than she was. Like the afternoon she slipped on the front steps and landed hard on her hip. Pain shot through her body and she cried out, expecting the worst. She lay there for a moment, staring up at the sky, her breath coming in ragged gasps. But as she waited for help, she realized she wasn't panicking. Even through the pain, she felt a surprising calm. She noticed the way the sun was shining through the branches overhead. She thought about how, despite the fall, she was still breathing. She could still feel her legs. In that moment, she felt gratitude rise up alongside the pain, and the fear began to dissolve. Her neighbors came running, concerned and full of urgency. She let them help her sit up. And when they asked if she was okay, she said yes, because in that moment, she truly was. Later, when she thought back on it, she marveled at how she could feel such peace in the middle of something so frightening. She knew it had nothing to do with her own resilience. It had everything to do with the presence she sensed in that quiet moment, reminding her that she was not alone. Sometimes peace comes when she is doing the most ordinary things, washing dishes, folding laundry, watering the plant her daughter gave her. There is something about these small rituals that soothes her. She believes God meets her in these humble moments, steadying her mind when it wants to wander into anxiety. She has learned that chaos doesn't have to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes it is the slow drip of worry that accumulates until it drowns her spirit. But even then, she finds that peace arrives like a gentle tide, rising just high enough to keep her from sinking. There are days when she wishes she could explain it to other people. She wants them to know that peace is not something you have to earn. It is not something you have to deserve. It comes uninvited, a quiet miracle that slips in when you have nothing left to give. She has stopped trying to understand why it comes or how it works. She simply receives it, grateful for the relief it brings. She often thinks about how different her life would feel without this peace. If she had to rely on her own strength, she knows she would have given up long ago. But there is something about being able to feel calm even when the world is chaotic that has sustained her. She has learned that peace doesn't mean everything is okay. It means you are okay, even when everything is not. She carries this truth like a secret treasure, a quiet assurance that no amount of fear can take away. When she feels herself start to spiral into worry, she closes her eyes and takes a deep breath. Sometimes she prays. Sometimes she simply waits. And almost every time she feels it, that warm, steady presence settling over her like a blanket, softening the edges of her fear. The chaos doesn't disappear. The problems don't magically resolve. But her heart quiets and her mind clears. And she remembers that she has always been held by something far stronger than the storms around her. There is a certain kind of protection that is impossible to measure or even fully recognize in the moment. It is not the kind you can see with your eyes or hold in your hands. It doesn't always look like rescue in the obvious sense. For the old woman sitting quietly in her small house, protection from harm has been something she has only been able to understand in hindsight. In the middle of her hardest seasons, it never felt like she was being shielded from anything. It felt like she was standing in the path of every storm. But later, when she looked back on all the times she should have been broken, she realized there was something or someone who had kept the worst from reaching her. There was a winter when the flu swept through her town, leaving hospitals crowded and neighbors whispering anxiously over fences. She had been feeling tired for days, but told herself it was nothing more than age and the cold weather settling into her bones. One evening, she grew so dizzy she could barely stand. She made her way to the couch and curled up under her quilt, her breath coming in shallow gasps. She could feel panic gathering at the edges of her mind as she realized she was too weak to call anyone. For a moment, she thought this must be the end. Her vision blurred, her thoughts slowing like an old clock winding down. But then something she could never explain happened. A warmth spread across her chest, not from any blanket or heating pad. She felt a sense of being held in place as though invisible hands were steadying her, keeping her tethered to life. She drifted into sleep and woke hours later to find her breathing easier, her fever breaking. She still doesn't know why she recovered when others did not. She has always believed that night was a moment of protection, something divine standing between her and the brink. She remembers another evening when the power went out during a violent storm. The wind howled against the house, rain slammed against the windows so hard she was sure the glass would shatter. She lit a single candle and sat in her armchair, trying to calm her racing heart. Every gust seemed to rattle her bones. She worried the old roof might peel away. She pictured the ceiling caving in, but through all the noise and fear, she felt something like a quiet voice inside her telling her she would be safe. It didn't matter that the storm was raging. It didn't matter that she was alone. She knew somehow that she was being protected. Hours later, when the power returned and the winds finally died down, she stepped outside to survey the damage. Limbs were scattered across yards. A neighbor's shed had blown apart. Shingles were missing from roofs up and down the street. But her little house stood nearly untouched. A few branches littered the lawn, but that was all. As she looked at her neighbors' homes and saw their faces drawn with worry, she felt a deep humility and gratitude she couldn't put into words. She knew her survival was not luck. She felt certain it was the same protection that had carried her through countless unseen dangers over the years. There were smaller moments too, moments that never made the news but etched themselves into her memory because of what might have happened. The day she stepped off the curb without looking and a car came around the corner faster than it should have. The driver slammed the brakes just in time, tires screeching, stopping inches from her legs. She stumbled backward onto the sidewalk, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might burst. The driver shouted something she couldn't hear over the roar of blood in her ears, but she barely noticed. All she could think was how easily her life could have ended in that instant. When she finally walked away, she felt a shiver down her spine, an awareness that she had not saved herself. Protection from harm was sometimes as subtle as a feeling in her gut. She recalled a morning she planned to walk to the pharmacy, the sun shining bright and the air surprisingly warm for early spring. She had her purse in hand, her coat draped over her shoulders when she was struck by an unshakable urge to wait. No clear reason, just a sudden heaviness in her chest telling her not to leave yet. She argued with herself. She needed her prescription, and it was silly to be so superstitious. But the feeling only grew stronger, an invisible pull keeping her inside. So she sat back down and waited, even though it made no sense. An hour later, she learned that there had been an accident at the intersection she would have been crossing at exactly that time. Two cars collided and skidded onto the sidewalk, striking a pedestrian. When she heard the news, she pressed a hand to her heart, feeling it beating steady and alive inside her chest. She could never prove that the feeling she had was anything more than intuition, but she knew better. She had lived long enough to recognize that some warnings come from beyond herself. When she was younger, she thought God's protection would always look dramatic. A voice from the sky, an angel standing guard in plain sight. But she came to see that real protection often happens in ways you only recognize when you look back. She saw it in the times she ran out of money, but never out of food. She felt it when she faced doctors' predictions that never came true. She even sensed it in the strange delays and inconveniences that once frustrated her, but later turned out to be saving her from worse trouble. Like the time her car wouldn't start, making her late to an appointment she was furious about missing, until she heard there had been a pileup on the highway minutes before she would have passed through. There were also the nights when she was too tired to double check the locks on her doors, and she woke in the morning to find everything still safe. The time she dropped something heavy that should have shattered but didn't. The days when her body threatened to fail her, but somehow held together just long enough to finish what she needed to do. Each moment on its own seemed small, but together they formed a picture she could not deny. She was being looked after, protected from harm she often never even knew was near. It made her think about all the ways people misunderstand what it means to be protected. It doesn't always mean you avoid every pain or hardship. She still lost people she loved. She still had days of fear and sorrow. But she came to understand that protection sometimes means the blow is softened, that what should have destroyed you only bruises instead. It means the story isn't over when it feels like it should be. It means there are forces working for your good in places you can't see or imagine. Even now, when she feels vulnerable in her age and all the ways her body has begun to fail, she trusts that same unseen shield is still around her. It is why she doesn't panic as easily as she once did. She has a history with this protection. She remembers the countless near misses, the illnesses she survived, the dangers that veered off course before they ever reached her door. And she knows in her bones that she is not here by accident. Sometimes in the quiet hours of the night, she thinks about all the time she was kept safe without realizing it until much later. She thinks about how many ordinary days were extraordinary only because she was shielded from harm she never even saw coming. And when she considers it all, she feels an awe so deep it makes her eyes sting with tears she doesn't bother to wipe away. Because she knows she is here today, not because she was clever or lucky or deserving. She is here because something holy has always stood between her and the worst the world could do. Strength to keep going is not always the kind of strength people expect to see. It isn't loud or obvious, and it doesn't announce itself with grand gestures. Most of the time, it looks like an old woman getting out of bed when her bones feel too heavy to lift. It looks like her standing at the kitchen sink, washing a single cup and plate because she still believes in keeping her life in order even when no one is watching. It is the quiet defiance of refusing to let sorrow swallow her whole. When she looks back over her life, she can see how many days were built on nothing but the smallest scrap of determination, something she can only describe as grace. There was a time when she thought she had reached the end of her endurance. The days had piled up, one after another, each one bringing its own small disappointment or ache. A week of gray skies and rain had dampened her mood in ways she didn't understand. She tried to read, to knit, to listen to the old hymns she usually loved, but everything felt heavy and flat. When night came, she sat alone in her living room, hands folded in her lap, and whispered out loud that she didn't know how much longer she could do this. The loneliness felt like a weight pressing down on her chest, so relentless she thought it might finally crush her spirit. But in that moment, when she expected only emptiness in response, she felt something stir inside her. It wasn't a burst of energy or happiness. It was just the tiniest flicker of will, the thought that maybe she could get through one more night and then see what tomorrow held. It wasn't the grand transformation she had hoped for, but it was enough to keep her sitting upright instead of sinking deeper into the darkness. Sometimes strength is nothing more than the decision not to give up, even when you have no idea what comes next. She woke the next morning surprised that the world was still turning and that her own heart was still beating. The rain had stopped and a little sunlight crept across her kitchen table. She stared at it for a long time, feeling something like relief settle over her. She still didn't know how she would get through the rest of the week, but for that moment, she could feel that she was still here. That was all she needed to keep going. Strength, she had learned, doesn't always roar. It often whispers. It hides in the ordinary things she does out of habit. Making her bed, brushing her hair, opening the curtains to let in the light. These tiny choices were her way of telling the world and herself that she was not finished yet. There were days she didn't believe in herself at all, but she still kept moving through the motions, and somehow the belief returned little by little. She had come to understand that you don't have to feel strong to be strong. You just have to keep showing up. She thought about the times when grief tried to convince her she had nothing left to live for. After her husband died, the days blurred together in a dull ache she thought would never end. She missed the sound of his voice in the kitchen, the way he hummed old songs while he fixed breakfast. She missed the way he always knew how to make her laugh, even on the hardest days. For a long time, she could barely get out of bed. She would lie still, listening to the creaks of the house, thinking that if she just stayed there long enough, she might slip quietly out of this world and into whatever came next. But each morning, something stronger than her sorrow made her swing her feet over the side of the mattress and plant them on the floor. At first, she thought she was just going through the motions because she didn't know what else to do. But eventually, she realized that this was strength. Not glamorous, not impressive, not something anyone would ever praise her for, but real. The kind of strength that grows in the dark and doesn't need recognition to keep existing. There were other times when she felt overwhelmed by the demands of simply surviving. The doctor appointments, the pills she had to remember to take, the endless forms and phone calls that came with living alone in old age. Each of these small tasks felt like a mountain when her energy was low. Sometimes she would sit at the table, the paper spread out in front of her, and think she would rather walk away from it all than face another day of it. But then she would remember all the times she had survived worse. She would think of the nights when she was a young mother with 2 sick children and no money to buy medicine. She had gotten through those years. She could get through this too. Strength to keep going often arrived in unexpected moments, like a sudden memory of something beautiful she had nearly forgotten. She would be staring at the stack of bills and suddenly recall a day from long ago when she and her husband took the children to the lake. She could almost hear the laughter and feel the warmth of the sun on her face. That memory would lift her spirit just enough to keep going. Sometimes all it took was remembering that she had once been happy and that she could feel that way again, even if only for a little while. On the hardest days, she would tell herself she only had to do the next thing. Not everything, just the next thing. Maybe that was getting dressed. Maybe it was making herself a cup of tea. Maybe it was opening the front door to breathe fresh air. She had learned that strength often looks like breaking life down into tiny pieces and tackling them one by one. Over time, those small actions built something bigger, a life that kept going, even when she thought it would fall apart. Sometimes people would tell her she was an inspiration, but she never felt that way. She didn't think of herself as particularly brave or special. She was simply someone who had decided again and again to keep living. She understood now that strength isn't always a choice you make once and for all, or it's a choice you make over and over, sometimes a dozen times in a single day. It's the willingness to keep rising, even when there's no clear reason to believe things will get better. There were days when the loneliness pressed in so hard she thought she would be crushed under its weight. On those days, she would sit quietly, close her eyes, and ask for help. She never knew exactly who she was speaking to, only that she believed in something bigger than herself, something that had carried her this far. When she opened her eyes again, the problems were still there, but she felt just a little more able to face them. She came to believe that maybe that was all the miracle she needed. The troubles disappeared, but that she had the strength to keep standing under them. She thought about all the other people who felt invisible, all the lives that looked small and unimportant from the outside. She knew that if anyone really saw the quiet battles they fought each day, they would understand that real strength isn't measured by what you accomplish. It's measured by the fact that you don't quit when no one would blame you if you did. It's measured by the choice to wake up, get dressed, and do the next thing. Some days she still wonders how she keeps going. But then she remembers all the times she thought she couldn't, and yet she did. She remembers the days she felt her heart break and still managed to love again. The nights she felt her spirit crack and still found hope in the morning. She has learned that strength doesn't always feel like courage. Sometimes it feels like nothing more than staying alive when it would be easier to give up. But that is enough. It has always been enough, no matter how invisible you may feel, no matter how heavy the burdens or how loud the chaos, your life is held by something greater than all of it. The silent signs, the unseen protection, the quiet strength to keep going, these are not accidents. They are reminders that you are not forgotten, that God sees you in every hidden corner and fights for you in ways you cannot always understand, even when you have nothing left to give, even when the world passes by without noticing. You are loved beyond measure. And that love shows itself in the smallest miracles and the deepest peace, carrying you forward one day at a time.